Oh yeah.
Half a day Wednesday.
Yep.
And then today. And
All right, we're live.
Yep.
Good afternoon. Welcome back. For those who attended our bar advisory group meeting this morning, we are back. My name is Patrick DeRay, Chief of the Bureau of Automotive Repair, and we are hosting a regulatory workshop on behalf of another agency, another state agency, the California Department of Food and Agriculture. Their Division of Measurement Standards was interested in reaching out to our stakeholders, namely the automotive repair industry, to discuss a regulatory proposal that they've been contemplating, dealing with transmission fluid labeling specifications. And we partnered with them to bring you today's regulatory workshop. I'm going to turn it over for a presentation from Alan Morrison, who's made a couple of presentations in the past before our bar advisory group, kind of enlightening them on some of their thoughts in moving a package like this forward. But this is more designed to get more public input and be more constructive, a back and forth dialogue on their maybe more specifics to their proposal and some things that they should take into consideration as they finalize the drafting of the regulatory provisions. Anything else? We are webcasting, as we always do with our public meetings. Anyone who's listening in can participate and ask a question or comment through the following address: barmeeting@dca.ca.gov. Again, that address on the webcast is barmeeting@dca.ca.gov. And we'll have someone come up and read the question and get it on the record. For anyone who wants to participate in this or expects that they'll be wanting to make a few comments, we'd ask that you do so on the mic so that we can pick it up for the webcast. Those listening in at home or at work can't hear comments coming in from the audience. You're welcome to take a seat up here on the dais or just come up to the front table here and ask a question of Alan or make a comment with respect to his presentation. I will now turn it over to Alan. I have a meeting that I have to go to upstairs in the director's office. It's like being called to the principal's office. But I'm going to depart for a little bit and hope to be back before you adjourn here this afternoon. Thank you and welcome, Alan Morrison.
Okay, well, thank you, Patrick, and thank you, everybody, for coming to this workshop. The purpose of this workshop is basically to solicit advice from the bar advisory group as to items related to automatic or transmission fluids, both in labeling and quality specifications and the like. Again, this is a concept meeting. We have no proposal on the table yet. We're not yet in the formal rulemaking process. I am soliciting advice in order to prepare the items that we want, what could go into that formal rulemaking, the model language and the like. So I'll begin here. And for the format is going to be, I have a little slideshow, but the real intent is to have questions from the group and to get input from the group. So bear with the slideshow. That's always a prerequisite, sort of, to have a little bit of PowerPoint. But the real purpose is your input. Okay, this is who I'm with. Again, my name is Alan Morrison. I'm with the Division of Measurement Standards, which is part of the California Department of Food and Agriculture. I am a Senior Environmental Scientist Supervisor. I oversee the Fuels and Lubricants Laboratory and program. So we do everything that goes into the car other than the windshield wiper fluids as far as fluids in cars. So that's the fuel, the lubricant, the coolant, the brake fluid, and the like. A little bit about this workshop, the CDFA, that is what I'll refer to as the California Department of Food and Ag for nomenclature. The purpose of this workshop is, again, to solicit from the auto repair industry input on our development of those regulations to help aid CDFA in the enforcement of the transmission fluid requirements as found in the Business and Professions Code, Chapter 15. So, a little bit about my agenda. I'm quickly going to review the role of CDFA in transmission fluids for those of you that are not aware of what it is we do. I will do a real quick review of a proposal that's found in the National Conference on Weights and Measures Handbook 130. Those of you that work in this arena are aware what that is. I will provide a discussion on what I feel the consumer's needs are, the auto repair industry needs are, and also important is what BAR's needs are, because BAR has an enforcement role in the repair industry, and I would like to discuss a little bit what their needs are. And then, of course, at the end would be to ask this group to give me advice or input to help formulate my regulations. Okay, for those of you that are not aware, California laws under the Division of Measurement Standards can be found in the Business and Professions Code in a couple different chapters. They're all located in Division 5. Chapter 6, which defines the Weights and Measures Organization. Chapter 14, which concerns fuels and motor oils and traditional gear lubes. Chapter 15 is what we call automotive products, which have transmission fluids, engine coolants, brake fluids, and now diesel exhaust fluid. Our regulations can be found in the California Code of Regulations, Title 4, and in Division 9, Chapters 6 and 7. Okay, real quickly to summarize what California's requirement for transmission fluids are, that a container, whether it be a quart container or a 250-gallon tote, it has to have a brand name. It has to have the name and place of or place of business of the manufacturer, packer, distributor, whoever put that product in the container. And we're pretty loose on that. A zip code, a name, a zip code. It doesn't have to be the exact street address, but some way that I can find and access that company. It must have a product name. And as of before 2016, we were calling out solely automatic transmission fluid. But we were having issues with things like CVT, which is the continuously variable transmission fluids, or the DCT transmissions, not really falling under the requirements of the law. So the law was changed to go from automatic transmission fluid to transmission fluid, and then there's always that descriptor that goes before it. So it's automatic, which is your traditional transmission, or a dual clutch, CVT, and the like. The other part that's required on a label is the duty type classification. Duty type classification actually originates from the old types. If those of you remember, we had type A, type F, transmission fluids, type G, type H. That was the nomenclature used back in before the 1980s, 90s and 80s, and so that is basically the specification of the transmission fluid. Now, we don't call a Dextron a duty type in our mind, but that's what it represents, is where with type A, now it could be type Dextron, or type IV for the Toyota one, or type M for Mazda and the like. The other thing that's required is an accurate statement of quantity. That's pretty simple, and a lot or batch number. So that's what's required on a container. Now we'll go to the next thing. Enforcement activity. Just to briefly summarize what we do for enforcement, we have field staff that will go out and sample. They'll sample at retail, they'll get the quart container, they will go into a distributorship, a bulk distributor, take a sample from that. They can go into a service garage and take a sample from the tank that is used to deliver product to the customer. So basically anywhere before that product enters into the customer's vehicle, we can sample. What we do is when we do sample, we determine the product duty type and the claim specification by looking at the label. So we look at the label, and what that says on the label as a duty type is what specification we test to. Currently, right now, those products are then brought back to the lab, and they're tested for compliance to physical specifications of all the duty types listed on that container. So we look at it, and if it has multiple duty types, we will test toward those multiple duty types certain physical properties. Now, it's no secret to the world that the only two physical properties our laboratory can look at are the kinematic viscosity at 100 C and the low temperature Brookfield viscosity at -40. Those are and for Dextron 6, we also do what's called the cold cranking simulator, but that's only on one particular specification. What the laboratory does, if it's a pass, there's no further action. We send out a report to the investigator, and they move on to the next sample. If it's a failure, the product can be removed from sale, and a notice of violation issued to the location where that was sampled. Now, what we do for garages and the like is we work up the supply chain. So if we go to a garage and we find a sample out of specification, we will then go up to the distributor and also look at the distributor level and sort of work up the food chain. One reason we do that is a lot of times the failures at the shops are a result of either commingling by the distributor. When they come out, they will mix product, not as much in ATF or transmission fluid as in motor oil, but we do see it happen. We've also seen totes delivered to garages that have been contaminated at the distributor, where they brought back something that had motor oil in it, and they would add transmission fluid and send it back out. So we have had cases like that. So typically in a garage, we'll work up the supply chain. The other thing we see at garages are labeling problems, where the distributor will have given the garage information about how to label or what's in the product, and it won't meet all the specifications. So it's really not the shop that does the adulterating, it's in the distributor, the supply chain. So I'd say very, very rarely do we actually see problems that are directly related to what a shop does. They're usually, they're almost a victim or a sort of a innocent party in the whole process with transmission fluids. Okay, a little bit about our requirements. In the Business and Professions Code, we have a section that states that a transmission fluid shall meet all the requirements for all transmissions disclosed on the label of the container. And that's where we get into a big problem. And you'll see later on the number of transmission or transmission fluid types there are, and producers are trying to put as much information on that label as they can about their recommendations for fluids. As those that know the specification, there are many properties of fluids that are mutually exclusive of each other, not very different, but they're mutually exclusive. Things in the viscosity, the high temperature viscosity, there's differences between, say, the Mercon and Mercon 5 or Mercon LV. There's also some differences in the low temperature viscosities that make fluids mutually exclusive of each other. Now, furthermore, in the law, that it states that a transmission fluid has to be sold, when they're sold, they have to disclose the type of transmission for which it was intended. So you cannot just say, oh, this is a transmission fluid. You have to disclose the type of transmission fluid is for it's intended, and any type that you disclose, it has to meet those specifications. So a little example, I thought I'd pull this up. This container, if those of you remember the cans, it's actually labeled correctly. It has the duty type, which is type A, and then on the back side, you'll see a list of the transmissions. And when the law was developed, this is actually what it was intended for. Is we used to know the transmission by Hydromatic or Turbomatic or Studebaker or things like that. So the industry was such that there were 3 major car companies in the United States and possibly the world that made most of the transmissions that were used in at least in North America. And they had specifications and they clearly defined what vehicles those were used for. So I just thought I would show this so you can kind of see where our laws originated from. Real quick, and I want to let you know, in the National Conference on Weights and Measures, they have a section, and I can show, I have more detailed in another part of the presentation. But within that national conference, they took California's requirement about meeting specifications, and they added something to it. They said, or have a demonstrated performance claim to be suitable for use in those transmissions. So this statement is what we're going to be looking at when we do rulemaking. We're going to be seeing if that, one, we can incorporate it into California regulations, if it will be compatible with our law based on our interpretation of that law and sort of the intent of the law. So the next step. I put this picture up. This is another product. At first it looks like it's a properly labeled container. It's universal, but at the top you see it says Dextron 3 Ford Type H. So that's a duty type. When we know what those fluids are, they have specification. The Dextron 3 and the Ford Type H, Dextron 2, excuse me, and the Ford Type H are similar fluids. And then you take a look at the backside and you start reading through, and the first part is okay. But there's one area that's sort of problematic, and that is if you read where it says, also provides good performance in car transmissions requiring Ford Type F. Well, if those of you know, Ford Type F was a transmission fluid that had no friction modifier in it. It was, or had, because of the design of the transmission, they needed more friction in that, so they put less slippery stuff in it. And that was the intent of that fluid, which the Dextron didn't have. So actually, a Ford Type F and a Dextron 2 are not the same fluids. They are different in the specifications. But the labels doesn't say it meets it. It says it also provides good performance. So my question is, what does that mean? How, if I were to see something like that today, how would I interpret that? If Mobile says, yeah, this is good for a Type F transmission, me, the state, am I really in the position, do I have the expertise to say, yeah, no, it doesn't, or yes, it does? Those are things to keep in mind in the future when we craft our regulations. Do we really have the technical know-how to make these decisions? Okay, a little bit here. I put this in here to it's kind of an eye chart, not an eye chart, but just difficult reading. Our current regulation, our current statutes were put in place in 1984. Prior to 1984, the state had a registration process where you send in your fluid and you'd send in $75 and we would register and give you a number. In 1984, they changed that to the current requirement. In 1984, again, as I said, there were only the U.S. car companies that had transmission fluids. At that time, Toyota didn't have theirs, Honda didn't have theirs, Nissan didn't have theirs. They used General Motors or Ford or Chrysler products and specifications. There were also, I said, they were all U.S. companies. The U.S. companies, and even today, the 2 remaining U.S. car companies, General Motors and Ford, do provide standards. I can go out and buy them for a nominal fee, not that much, $38, $40, and I get the copy of their standards. So the 2 U.S. car companies still will provide or offer for sale their standard so that I can look at that and I can test against it, or I could design a product against it. The Asian car companies, I have not been able to get any Asian car company specification. I do have a JASO specification, which is kind of their Japanese equivalent of SAE minimum specification, but each car company, no, we can't get their specification. The European ones, the same way. We cannot get theirs. We only got a Mercedes specification sort of by accident when Mercedes and Chrysler were together. Somebody at Chrysler didn't know they weren't supposed to give out the specification and provided it to us. But now that Chrysler's Fiat, and I can't get anything from them. I cannot get anything out of Mercedes. I can't even get a Mercedes to say the specification I have is in fact their specification, even though it has their name and all over the top, all over it. So that's a little bit about some of the problems. The other thing that's happened is the number of transmissions has increased drastically. Somewhere there's over 350, 400 different transmission fluid specifications, when in 1984 there were probably 5 or 6 in place. And so just to sort of let you know there, again, as I said, it's becoming increasingly difficult for me to enforce stuff. I'll get a container with 15 different specifications produced by the world's largest oil company, which I would assume has the resources and the know-how that says, oh, this works in all these. The specifications I have, they don't. Or they're mutually exclusive in some of the requirements. And I'll show you here, this is the data sheet that my lab generates. Those are actually all the specifications that we have right there. We don't have access to any other specification. And you can see our list there, and I'll show you this list. This is a partial list of all the specifications that are out there. And so you can see the problem is we don't have specifications, so I'm only enforcing if you're calling something, say, a Mercon 5 and a Mercon LV, yeah, I'll look at that. But, and as I said, I have the Mercedes only by accident. It was given to us. We didn't sneak it in any way. It was provided to us, and we will provide that to anybody if they so ask, because we do enforce against that, and that has to be available to the public. But again, that's the problem. So move on to the next thing. The other part I'm facing, CDF is facing on the issue of suitable for use claims. Currently, I have expertise on 2 parameters. That's all my laboratory has any experience with and expertise on. So the questions I have is, if I were to look at something and try to compare, what data would need to be presented to me? What do I need to know to look at it? How would I evaluate that data? A car company has a team of engineers that would fill up this room who evaluate each of their specifications, right? How does an organization that has me and two of my staff on staff, how do we interpret that data? And how does it impact our enforcement? So these are some questions that I have. I don't know the answers to them right now. I just have these questions. And then some other, little later on when we get into discussions, I'd like to know what the consumer's needs are. I would like to know what the auto repair industry's needs are, and then what the needs of or the requirements of the bar are. What do they require when you install something into a car, whether it be a rubber stopper on a brake cylinder, or whether it be a fluid or whatever. What are their requirements for you as an installer? I know as an installer, you don't have to go get the OEM part. You can put in a non-OEM part to the car. And the OEM could design that part, and part of the specification is it's painted blue, and you go out and buy a part that's painted green. Well, it's not to OEM spec. but it's suitable for use in that application. Or it may have a different elastomer structure or a different elastomer in the part or something like that, a different style or design of a windshield wiper blade. Anything like that which can be functionally okay, and the bar would let you install it, but it's not exactly the same. It doesn't meet the exact same specification. So, okay. I'm almost done here, so we'll get into our discussion, but kind of some ideas about what I think the consumer needs. The consumer goes out and he purchases the fluid at retail, or they go out to the garage and it's installed by the repair shop. They don't ever see the fluid. You pour it from the bottle straight into the thing. It's not visible. You don't measure it. As a consumer, you just kind of pour it in, or the shop pours it in. And that consumer depends on that product label or the installer's recommendation that they have the correct fluid. You know, I go out to the AutoZone and I look at the shelves and I try to read all the bottles. Oh, I think this is good for mine. Now, there are more resources today. People go on the internet, they look at that, they review sites, but in most part, it's what's on that container or what is related to that container or is what the shop tells them. The auto repair industry needs, and if you can think of more things, let me know. The installers purchase product from a distributor. They don't make it, they just purchase a product. They install it into the vehicle based on the label duty type and the producer's recommended application. So when you go buy a fluid from a distributor or producer, they'll give you a chart. You know, this is the vehicles that it's applicable for, or it'll have a name on the container. So they give you the product data sheet, they go to the internet, other sources. But basically, the producer will provide you a sheet that says, yes, I think it's good in all these. Now, you as the installer are responsible for the product sold. So you do have a responsibility, but you know, you're a garage doing transmissions. You know how to fix transmissions. You don't know how to design fluid specification. And the other thing the shops wanted, they do want a limited inventory. You don't want a warehouse, Costco-sized warehouse full of fluids in your back. You couldn't afford it. You couldn't stay in business. There are some, you know, you as the shop want to reduce or limit your inventory, and that makes sense. I can understand why. Now, sort of the conflicts, just to go that I see. The retailers and installers, they want to carry a limited, they want to carry product that meets the needs of all transmission, but it's not really possible with today's market. As I said, you can't have a huge inventory. So what do? You try to find something that can be used in multiple applications, universally applied. And the other thing, though, is that the user may not be really aware of all the performance issues. So that's why they depend on the label and they depend on the producer to tell them that. And the other thing that the industry is looking at is price. Sometimes a licensed product will have a much higher price. And so you say, well, if this is twice as much as this, but they say the same, you know, what am I going to buy? There's also a wide range of pricing in which in licensed products, which makes people wonder, well, is the price just there because they can charge more, because of the name, because of the container, whatever. And the other thing, though, is a consumer can install non-compliant products. That's the other part of this whole equation. I, as a car owner, can go buy type A transmission fluid, and put it in my car. There's nothing that will prevent me from doing that. Now, I could read it if I read the container and it gives me the correct information, but I choose to install it in a different manner. There's nothing to prevent that. I, as a state, cannot go out and stop you from doing that. So, okay. Again, BAR's requirements. The BAR requires the correct fluid to be installed in a vehicle. It allows for substitution of OEM specified products. So product, as long as it works, it does the job, BAR allows it. You don't have to put a General Motors part in a General Motors car. You can put an aftermarket part as long as it works and meets the performance. And the other thing I think they require is that the consumer be informed about what you're installing. So if you are installing an aftermarket part or something like that, that at least that's put down so the consumer knows what they're getting. I think I've seen it on my invoices. If they're installing a certain part, they'll identify where it is or where it's not, just so I can say, yes, okay. And the other part of this equation that we have is the supply chain. The producer is actually the one that's responsible for blending everything together. They blend the additive package together, they blend the base oil together, and the like. The additive suppliers, and I didn't mention a lot about them, but there are 3 major additive suppliers at least in North America. That's Affion, Lubrizol, and Infinium. They supply the bulk of the additive that go in the transmission market. They supply the licensed products. They supply the unlicensed products. They'll supply additive to blenders. They are the sort of the major players. They're out there. They know what Honda puts in their transmission fluid. They know what Toyota does. They know what Mercedes. They know all this information. They're the ones that are recommending to other producers the information about universal, suitable for use in, and the like. Base oil suppliers, base oil is a pretty simple thing. It just meets a certain viscosity requirement. There's plenty of information out there. It's something that's pretty easy to deal with. It's the additive suppliers that are the ones that are the main player in designing these formulations. Okay. I just put this is just a little bit about some of the OEM's concerns. They're responsible for the performance of the transmission, so when it doesn't shift right, the Dodge didn't do their transmission right, or General Motors transmission blew up on me. They have warranties to deal with and customer satisfaction. They also control their own specifications. There's no law that says they have to give their specifications to anybody. They are often not published, like I said, none of the Asian ones, none of the European ones. And then the additive suppliers also work with the OEM to develop the specification. So when General Motors comes out with a new specification, it's worked closely with Affion to come up with that specification, or whoever else whoever else is an approved additive supplier to their requirement. Okay, so real quick here, just so a few of you out there, I put this slide in there just to have it there. Magnuson-Moss. Magnuson-Moss basically says you can put something in the vehicle and the car company can't say, oh, I void your warranty because you used this fluid instead of that fluid, or you used, Chevron gas instead of BP gas, or you use this product instead of this product. They have to demonstrate that the product that you choose to substitute did in fact cause harm to that. So as a producer, I can make something and you can buy it and you can put it in your car and it doesn't immediately void the warranty. Okay, and I just put a little bit about CDFA's role under Magnuson-Moss. Our laws limit what's in the container. We don't go into saying you as a consumer what you put in the car. Or even if you go to an installer and you say, look, I want you to put this product in my car, we don't restrict that. What we do is we look at the quality of the product selling to make sure that the labeling is correct and that the consumer, the user, knows what's in that. We do not control what the actual end use of it is. So I just want everybody to know that we're not restricting what you use. We only limit how you describe the container at which you use the product from. So that's my contact information. I have it on the slide for those of you who do not know me, and that's it for this presentation. Now we'll start with the sort of the question to answers.
Alan,
Yes.
over here. Over here.
Oh, okay, there you go.
Thanks, Alan. I think part of what the industry is trying to figure out, because we've had multiple directions from your department because of the issues that are, in one sense, we're getting direction that unless you use the OEM fluid, you're in trouble. If you use a generic fluid, put an additive in there, and it's changed, in essence, what's on the original container's label by putting that additive. Give you a simple example. One of the questions that came up is if I buy a generic fluid and I have this company that comes into my repair shop that gives me this whole inventory of additives that I can put in for Honda, Toyota, whoever. If I mix those two and put them in, we got direction one time that, no, you're violating the law because that container no longer truly describes what the makeup of that fluid is. Then we had further discussions, and it was like, well, no, if you have both labels and you show that both labels combined will meet the manufacturer specifications, you're not out of compliance. So I think part of the reason we wanted this workshop was to really kind of figure out, and just by, let me back up for a minute. We've talked to a lot of our members, and we've talked to new car dealers, we've talked to aftermarket, and the bottom line for them, I'm not going to risk a transmission going bad anymore by buying a generic fluid and putting an additive in. I'm just not going to buy a $3,500 transmission, period. So I'm going to go to Ford, I'm going to go to Toyota, I'm going to get whatever the original equipment manufacturer fluid is, and I'm done with this, And if I can't carry it because I don't have the inventory space, then fine. As I get that car into my shop, I'll send somebody to go get it, or I'll have it delivered. But the bottom line is, I'm just going to put the OE fluid in and forget all this stuff of carrying bulk supply and then putting these additives in. Flip the coin on that, and if some others were here I'm a little surprised some others aren't here this afternoon, because it's been very hot topic for them, because they have these external providers that come into their shops, sell their wares, and are giving them this speech about a generic fluid with an additive that meets all OEM specs. You're not going to have an issue. And it was interesting because I was just talking to a member, and they shall remain nameless. They just had done a transmission service on a 2014 Charger. And they used this particular company's additive, and their warranty for their shop is 6 months, 6,000 miles. This particular vehicle went 6,014 miles. So technically for their shop, they're in the clear. That's not how they want to treat their customer. So what they did was they got a hold of the fluid manufacturer and said, you need to get a hold of your insurance company for your coverage on this fluid additive, because I'm not buying the transmission for this Charger. And so after some wrangling and going to the executives of the company, they finally got the issue resolved, because while in fact everything they were told about the fluid and the additive, it should have been a no-brainer, this transmission should not have failed, but it did. In the end, the company made it good for not only the consumer, but the business. But it goes back to the original thing. I saw David shaking his head, that many of the shops are just done with this. Just give me the OEM fluid, and I'm not going to worry about additives anymore or generic fluid. I'm just going to use OEM and just be done with this. And so I think part of the workshop today is to figure out, what's the speed limit? Let's post a sign that says, this is what it is, and then we can all conform to that so it complies with what BAR wants to get done, what your department wants to get done, and then ultimately we've got a roadmap for the companies that do the repairs, working with whoever comes in, that, hey, if this isn't the speed limit that you're driving, we're not playing.
Well,
That makes sense?
yeah, Zach, there's a file that says BPC. It's a Word file on my drive, and I'll show you. We do have a code section in the statutes that basically says that if you add anything to a transmission fluid, it has to meet the minimum, well, I'll let him call it up to get the actual word. Do you see that there? It should have BPC in there. Let me, do you see it, or, I'll hold on.
Just realized. Yeah, we have 1 year,
Give me 1 second.
14-year-old.
And again, John, I appreciate
Yes,
what you're saying, and part of what this is, currently, CDFA has no regulations covering transmission fluids. Everything is just in statute.
Right.
And so what we would like to do is to develop regulations that give you those speed limit that you talk about that comply with what the law says. You know, I cannot go out and say, you know, I cannot, let me move them, oops, mouse here, mouse is a little, how do I move this mouse here? Oh, move it down to, it's 13701. It's, if you move the mouse down, just to the next, right there. This is a statute, and it's actually been in there for a while. It's not something that was recently added, but it's back in the early 90s, that any material sold as a additive to a transmission fluid cannot fall below minimum specifications as we established by the department. But we haven't established those, which is what we need regulations for, to establish what we mean by those minimum specifications. If it's, for example, and I agree, if you have an additive that's a friction modifier, and I say, if you add this to your transmission fluid, you know, it will make it shift harder and you'll see more like a race car, for example, or it will make it smoother. You know, those are the parts that I need to add to the regulation, is how do I define those minimum requirements? So that point, which is to modify or to add context to 13701. And what you probably hear within our department is different interpretations of what that means. If you add two things together and it doesn't change the specifications, then you're not in violation of this section. If it changes it, but how do you define change? Is it better or worse? I mean, how does an individual define that? Does it enhance the properties, or is enhancing the properties not allowed? And in different field staff will interpret that differently. Now, I think yes. So we need regulations describing exactly what we mean by that, and whether or not, if something enhances it, is it allowed, versus changing it. So whether you change it, the problem with changing it is these specifications are extremely complex. So if I take a really cheap, you know, Dextron 3 Mercon fluid that might be relatively high viscosity and all that, and I add something to it, and let's say what I add to it has a solvent that will thin it out so that when I do the initial testing on the viscosity or the low temperature viscosity, it passes. But when that fluid runs through the transmission and you start getting some shearing, or you start getting things like that, you know, that when the properties start changing, that additive doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a good point, because so often what you get from these vendors that come in selling their products is, oh, well, it'll meet or exceed the OEM spec.
Right.
but you're taking them at their word, you know, and I mean, you don't have a lab there to run all the tests. And it's just like when some of the fluids first came out, unless you put shutter guard in there, you had a problem with the way the transmission shifted when the customer left.
Right.
You know, and so those were some of the issues that our members had brought to us and said, you know, if we could just get a standard, and if that standard is don't use anything but OEM, fine. But then you're going to have all these third-party providers come out and say, no, 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 you're putting us out of business. We want to be able to sell our product.
Right.
You know, well, if your product puts my customer's transmission at risk, I don't know that I want to play.
Right. Well, the part that then becomes a concern, if I require that somebody submits data to me that demonstrates that this product meets the performance requirements, I can do that, and I already have authority to ask for those documentations under our existing law. What I don't have is necessarily the expertise to know what that means, and I can ask for it, and then we can set the numbers down, but I don't know what those mean. I think just for individuals to see, Zach, there's a file that should have the it's a PDF file. The one that says GM. That's that PDF file right there. Okay. For those of you that have not seen a transmission fluid specification, this is the General Motors Dextron 6 specification, and it is 93 pages long, right? So, and if you move down, scroll down, you'll find a table that they call table, I think it's table 1 or table 2. It's the first big table you get to, right there. Okay, that table 1, there are 30 different tests that you have to do on this product. 30 different categories of tests. Some of the tests have multiple parts. That's what a specification looks like for a modern transmission fluid. We, in our organization, we only do 2 of the parameters on here, or 3 actually, for the Dex 6. We do the kinematic viscosity at 100 C. We do the Brookfield viscosity at minus 40 C, and we do the cold cranking simulator, which is a little farther down at minus 30 C, I think it is. But so so that becomes the problem. Now, if I take something, and I don't have on here, but I can call one of the issues you find on the current Dextron 3 Mercon is they're no longer the best. They're no longer the best. There are multiple versions of Dextron 3 Mercon. Well, when GM and Ford canceled their copyrights, so you can't use that, it sort of gave the manufacturer of that product, they can choose whichever specification they want. So they can go back to a Dex 3 specification in the late 80s specification. There's no limit on what they can do when they call that base oil. So it may meet, but it doesn't meet the best Dex 3. It may not be a synthetic product. There's a lot of may not be's. That's it.
Alan?
Yes.
So Dave Kusa with ASCCA, and I'm a shop owner. So from the shop owner's point of view, I want to see manufacturer specifications on the label, wherever I'm buying my product, whether it be from the manufacturer or from an aftermarket source. So I think we're all pretty aware that, if we buy something directly from GM, directly from Ford, they're not making it, right? They're buying it here somewhere. And, in this 2010 vehicle, which has a certain transmission fluid in it, and the 2012 vehicle that has the same specification, it's probably 2 different manufacturers, right? Because they're buying it for they can get their best price break as well. So, so that's the important part to me, right? This information, I mean, there's obviously none of us can determine if what is in this bottle meets this, because it just has to say it on a label, and I have to trust that.
Right.
So on slide, you don't have to go back to it, but slide 11, you were referring to that one, you said also works well in.
Right.
Well, that would be confusing to me, right? Even though there's a specification there, because it doesn't say, meets or exceeds, it says it kind of works in this too, right, for this spec. So that verbiage would be confusing to me, the shop owner. As far as the consumer's point of view, my customers don't care, right? They don't ask me what very rarely is, oh, you have to get the part from the OEM, right? And then we have the conversation that we just had. They're not making their parts, right? I can buy this part, same part, less money, better warranty. Would you like me to do that? And the answer is always yes. So they're trusting the shops to do the right thing, to use the right product. So from the consumer standpoint, they have to be protected, right? We have to ensure that shops are doing the right thing. And I think we all do that, right? I mean, I've never asked my dentist to see his grades in school, right? Anything like that, right? So we just assume our providers are doing right by us, right? So sometimes to our detriment as consumers. So the other part of this that was pretty telling is, like we were talking about, 25 years ago or 20 years ago, or even 30 years ago when I first got into this industry, we had Dex 3 Mercon and Type F, right? And that covered 99.9% of the cars on the road. Now we see that screen where there's got to be 300 different specifications, and I probably have 20 different transmission fluids in various quantities sitting on my shelf at the shop, right? So the allure of having magic in a bottle is great. I don't use them. I know shops that do and have had great success with them. I guess from that standpoint, right, it really goes back to if the manufacturer of that product can guarantee to me, here's the science that this little bottle is going to turn this lead into gold, I'm fine with that, right? As long as they will stand behind it, as we learned from that one shop with the Dodge transmission, right? If they're going to stand behind it, then I'm fine with it, right? But I need reassurance. I need science. I need documentation. I need something that as an owner that I'm doing right by my customer. That they're not going to be sitting on the side of the road, and I'm not be writing a check, right? So, but more importantly, I got to do right by my customer, by my consumer. So, and then one other question that you had asked as far as the type of parts, right? Really, as far as I know, the only thing we really need to specify on our repair orders is new, used, or remanufactured, rebuilt, right? Beyond that, it doesn't matter.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know about that part, but I think what the statutes right now, and if you, they require that the label meets all the listed specifications. Now, one of the items that I am going to explore is the difference between, say, the principal display panel, so that it identifies the product, and this is what the product is, and we require that you in fact meet that, and then maybe allow. Right now, we don't allow the words like recommended for or we if I say, and I'll use names. If I get a product that is made by Chevron, right? That is meets this specification, but we recommend it for all these products. They did their test. They feel that they can stand by those claims. Right now, I tested for both the name of the product and all those recommended. What I have to explore is that a legal requirement for me, or could I just test it to that primary name, what it calls for? So I allow the producers out there to make a product, and it meets this specification. But then the producer makes claims on the back, which they're responsible for, because when you make a claim, you have to uphold that claim. But is my enforcement action, does it go back to those claims? Or does it just stay to what's on the principal display panel?
I would hope it would go to the claims, right? And then again, from the shop owner point, from my point of view, I'm not using that product in anything other than it says meet or exceeds this standard, right? This recommended stuff, I'm going to go get the right stuff.
Yeah, and that's the question.
Yeah.
I don't know. Right now, we try to take the standpoint that everything on that label has to meet it. Now, as you can see, we don't do a whole lot of tests. The other part of all this is I'm thinking about maybe getting myself out of the go grab it, test it business, but into the you demonstrate, I go have you presented me the data, because one of our code sections does give us the authority to request data from producers.
And that's the path I would follow if I were you, yeah.
Yeah, if I do that and I say, okay, you give me data, and one of the things you can see here, there's a elemental analysis, metal analysis. I can do that test, and I can fingerprint a fluid. So it's not that requirement. There's no specific requirement other than report. So that report means if I look at that data, I can run those same exact tests. I have that instrument that does that testing, and I can say, oh, you have no no manganese in there, no molybdenum, or whatever part of your additive, or some of the contaminants, the silicon that's in there, or iron or something like that. That'll show them whether or not that the used base oil or something, used oil that went into making that, or things like that. So I can require that. I can fingerprint it. I can do the viscosity ranges that you specify. I can test for those. Yes, it does meet those same ranges. So I'm kind of in that realm with what I can and can't do. And from what you guys are telling me, you take sort of the more stringent approach. Make sure that what's in this container, meets whatever it's labeled as. That is what we try to do now, but with limited tool set.
And some companies that do a lot of fluid services, right? Where the expectation is you're going to come in, get your fluid serviced, and go on your way. How do they keep 200 different fluids in stock to service, to at least one car a day, right? So that, that's just another example of the need or want to use, a base fluid with an additive, right? So, from a business standpoint, right? If I'm a quick change oil place, I got to do that. I don't see how you can't. And you can't live if you're going to put $50,000 worth of inventory on your shelf and hope you use it. So, there needs to be but there needs to be a way to make sure the consumer is protected, that the stuff that's going in the car is accurate. So, and I don't know what that is, but it needs to happen. Oh, and last thing I wanted to mention. So, standards, right? GM. So if you pull the dipstick on a GM vehicle, it'll tell you what's supposed to go in it, right?
Correct.
So, but if you go look at GM's recommended specifications now, every car takes DEX 6, right? They've basically eliminated DEX 3 in any of their recommended service specifications for any vehicle with automatic transmission fluid in it. So, so anyway, again, right, it's something to keep in mind that, as time goes by, when a company like GM says, no, everything takes DEX 6, well, I don't want to get in trouble for using DEX 3.
Right. Well, you're right. General Motors has basically pulled all the copyrights and all their products other than, so they basically say, we own the copyright, you cannot use it. That's why you see the DEX 3 Mercon. You don't see Dextron 3 anymore on the front label because you cannot, and what they've done is General Motors will go after you if you use the Dextron 3, but if you put it in the small print on the container, they don't bother. And that's, or that's why you see that, that labeling of that method. So, okay, you guys, this is part of what I have to sit down and try to see how you craft a specification and how you handle the additive industry. And part of it is if you come in and you need to top off a transmission, like you say, and they say, oh, well, we'll take a couple quarts of this, we add this, and it enhances the property. Right now, if it changes any of the properties, we don't allow that. It's not supposed to modify or change, at least the properties that we test for. Now, if I start asking for more information, then it may change some of those properties and I may restrict something more. If I start looking at, say, some of the test after a certain many hours, how it shears down, things like that. And the one problem I have also with the additives is, do they have control over the base oil? That's a big part of this, is that an additive supplier can make something in a bottle, right? But do I have control over the base oil you add it to, or what that base material? I'm assuming it has a minimum specification, and this is just enhancing it, or not. And I recently was reading about an additive made by one company that was basically basically a viscosity improver. So it was something that thickened up the oil. So that's all it did to the transmission, is it thickened up the oil, made it more viscous, solved the problem of slipping and all that, but was reported to cause a lot of problems within the torque converter, within some of the clutches and things in there, increasing too much pressure. So yeah, it did what it was supposed to do, right? Solve the slipping problem, but later on down the road you had other failures. Okay. Any other questions there? I don't want to. Everybody's. Go ahead.
Maybe just a question or a thought. Would you ever consider some kind of certification program? Like if you could get these data sheets from the manufacturer, then you could kind of certify certain manufacturers based on the data?
One issue with that is I do not feel that I have the authority in statute to do that. As I said, this current statutes were created from earlier statutes where we had a registration process. Up until 1984, you had to send in your product, you had to register it. What we were doing is we were making sure that this was your product, and when we went out in the field and we found that product for sale, we could go back, and we used to run an IR and a metal scan, I think, on it, and we would make sure that this product that was, Pepsi in the field was in fact Pepsi's product. But they eliminated that registration. I don't know if do not think I have the authority to create that right now. Now, if the statutes were changed or something like that, I could do that, but that would have to require a statute change, and that's those folks over there in the building with the gold ball on top. So, but it's a good idea, and it's one that I've thought of. Other questions?
Something that popped in my mind just now is, you probably heard it. It hurt. Do we have a real problem here that we're trying to solve?
I think part of the problem is I find it uncomfortable for California that every major fluid manufacturer has product data sheets that have a little footnote that says not for use in California, and not for use in California. And if you can go to Chevron, Valvoline, Mobil, Quaker State, any of those products, and you will see that footnote, not for use in California. And that bothers me a little bit, is why do they say, yes, you can use it everywhere else, and no, you cannot use it in California? It makes us look bad as a state. People don't say, oh, well, California is protecting me. What they tend to say is, oh, California is being California and over-regulating the marketplace. And that bothers me a little bit, and it bothers me that that some of their claims, when I hear that, and I've had presentations by both Affion and Lubrizol that basically said, look, we have all this data to show that given this base oil and these additives, it will work in these transmissions. And we stand by that. And Lubrizol is kind of a small company. I think it's in the multi-billion dollars worth of sales. They do most all the additives. Affion the same way. They were they do most of all a large chunk of the additives. Infineum the same way. There's a few small additive suppliers that do their own, but they're basically producing additives that are based on or similar formulations to the major additive companies. I don't know if I'm in the position, do you understand? I feel somewhat uncomfortable by it, but at the same time, the law is the law, and it gives me clear authority to do what you're saying is, does it meet it? Yes or no? If it doesn't, then no, you can't sell it. The other part of the regulations is there products that are getting by our enforcement that it's not only, I blended up to meet the viscosity, I dye it red. We don't know if it really works, right? That's the other part that I'm concerned about is I can blend up the right viscosity, I can dye it red, and I can put it out there for sale. And we do have producers that I suspect that's what they're doing. They know what we test for. It's public information. I can't hide it. And they blend for that. But are they making the right, does it have the right friction modifiers in it? Does it have the right antioxidants, the right, seal conditioners, things like that in there? Maybe the solution, and what I'm hoping to get support for by leaning a little bit more to where we interpret it, is to get the producers to support us, get the repair industry to support us, because we're going to look a little closer. But the producers, we're going to maybe give a little bit more understanding of their product, the way they formulate their products. And that will, in turn, allow a little bit more product to be sold that might help the consumer on the price end, it might help the shop on the reducing inventory end, but it still does the goal of protecting everybody. Yeah, somebody, oh. Did I hear somebody, or?
They were hallway.
Hallway, okay. So now that Patrick's back, one question for Bar. Yeah, and the question is, what does the Bureau of Automotive Repair, what would it like to see as far as what our enforcement is on these products, and what is your position on using products that don't meet the claim specification? I mean, when you install a product in a vehicle, it may or may not meet all the original manufacturer specification, but if it works, how do you handle that? Is that not a good question?
No, it's a fine question. We've spoken with a number of product suppliers, if you will, various products that will test brake fluid and told those companies to really regulate your products, and whether they work or not, that's not our regulatory responsibility. That's not our regulatory role. We regulate the point of sale from the automotive repair dealer, those who are selling to their customers the need for services on their vehicles. And if they're false or misleading statements that they're making about the effectiveness of a product or the need to use a product, that's where we would enter into our jurisdiction.
Okay, so basically, CDFA has the responsibility for what's in that container, and our anything that we craft should reflect, we want to make sure that the helps me in thinking that go a little bit more effort and I evaluate product claims, and based on data that I request from the producer, that might be, it'll be a lot more work for us, but that might not be a bad approach, so that I allow a little bit more flexibility in the marketplace, but at the same time, I do more diligence to make sure that the claims made on that label are in fact met. And if somebody meets something and they give me they have an additive supplier, they give me a data sheet that says, oh, this is what it all meets, I take their product, again, I validate that this is in fact the product that's on the data sheet, and it's not, then I've done some good, because a producer who's making the additives may have a good product, and you add it to a base oil, and that's a good product, but the actual person producing it out here and bottling and labeling it is not following that.
That sounds good. I would add that, in our performance of our duties, our field offices, doing a station inspection for whatever reason, or in the process of mediating a consumer complaint, if there are issues that we come across and see potential compliance issues that we're concerned about, we would be interested, I hope you're interested in us at least partnering with you, at least to forward that information to you to follow up on. But I don't think, that wouldn't necessarily, we'd obviously need some training or some education for our folks to be able to identify some of those issues. But it's certainly within the scope of our responsibilities to call attention to some other issues that don't necessarily fall within the Automotive Repair Act and our regulations, but potentially another partner agency or sister agencies' responsibilities that we might be able to forward to you for follow-up.
Okay, well, thank you. Any other questions, or everyone's quiet out there.
I have a kind of follow-up. Thanks. Thanks for the presentation, Alan. In terms of the presentation, is that something that it's going to be posted on the BR website, or we can get a copy of it? Because I didn't receive a copy of it.
Yes. The presentation is to be posted.
Okay.
I don't know if I cannot post the Dextron 6 specification. I can show that, but I have to actually retain control of the copy. That's a copyrighted thing, this standard that I have up here. But I will post my presentation, and that is available.
Okay. And then in terms of the next steps now after this workshop, what are you envisioning here, and in terms of a time frame, where are you going with this?
Well, I would like to go back to my my division and start I'm going to, I think based on what I've heard here today, I am going to develop a regulatory concept molded or wrapped around the idea of meeting a product specification and/or if you have a performance, if you have a, let me go back to the, can you go, Zach, go to my presentation. Yeah, thank you. Where are we? Yes. So but while you're pulling that up, I think the idea is to go to that two-part concept, which is one, you must meet a specification, or you must demonstrate that you meet the performance claims, the performance requirements of that specification. And I think that's the approach I'm going to start out with. Again, and the idea is so that I mean, like you said, everything on the label is specified. So you can't call it one thing and then call something on the back that it doesn't meet. So if you have a variety of specifications on the label, and you say, well, I'm not really looking at the viscometric properties per se that you're looking at, but I'm looking at all these other performance properties which are met, then we will evaluate that and allow that to be sold. It'll change a little bit of our enforcement strategy. Do we go out and say, if we find a product, do we call up the manufacturer or send them a request? They send us the data. Do we go out and blanket the state and find everything out there and send to all the manufacturers, look, this product is being sold in California. You have to demonstrate to us that it in fact meets the specifications. If it doesn't, when we find it in the marketplace, we will remove it from sale. And of course, so I think that's what I'm going to craft in that direction. Given the speed of the department and all that, I can't say how long that'll take, but I'll tell you this, rulemaking takes at least 1 year, if not longer, right? I think.
Oh, yeah. These guys know this drill already.
I mean, it's not something that we can, let me get right here. This is, I think this will be the, whoops, I passed it. I think this will be the direction that I start. This is going to be my starting point, which is you shall meet all the manufacturer requirements disclosed on the label or have demonstrated performance claims to suitable for use in those transmissions. And it's going to be a little bit of a challenge. The NCWM, the independent lubricant manufacturer, and some of the other manufacturers have been pushing this, but they haven't really told me how I enforce that or have demonstrated. But I'm going to offer this up as, you tell me how I enforce this. You the manufacturers, you give me the tools to enforce this, and I will be able to give you the ability to sell a more variety of products that you feel are good.
And I think that perfect place to start. There is one product that we do use in my shop, and it's a worldwide product that meets, or by their claim meets or exceeds the specifications of a large number of transmissions manufacturers, but there's also pretty darn clear on what it doesn't meet or exceed, right? Like, don't use it in this, and this. Won't work, right? So, and this one recommendation, I don't know if it's any help or not, but WorldPack, which is one of our major suppliers, their website is awesome, right? I can put in a year, make, model and select transmission fluid, and it brings up the correct transmission fluid for me.
That's WorldPack?
WorldPack, yeah. They're a parts distributor.
Okay.
So, and I can connect you with whoever you need to be connected with in WorldPack. And then one, again, may not be relevant, but when we saw the demise of R12 and the introduction of R134, it was a pretty big part of the market of retrofitting. And the regulation for R134 was pretty, I don't want to say weak, but it was very open-ended. And essentially, whatever the manufacturers were going to use to replace R12 just had to be, below whatever global warming specification there was, right?
Right.
So, we had all kinds of, hexane products, butane products, because they aren't global warmers. They're fantastic in an air conditioning system. They're also explosive, right? So, you could put Pepsi in the AC system because it was lower than the global warming standard, right? So, and nobody cared. I mean, regulation-wise. So, going forward with this, that's something that maybe, I don't know if it was relevant or not, but maybe keep that in mind.
Yeah, I now that you mentioned, I think WorldPack has a distributor in Roseville or something.
sure they do, yeah.
Yeah, I think I might, yes, I might have encountered them before. And you're right, is, the, you know, there, what we'll do is I'll look at that. I will craft some regulatory language. We'll wrap it around this requirement. Now, it may be, I don't know if I can get this to, looking at our statute, if it will be allowed. There's a certain set of rules. We go through OAL and through our own department that will allow whether or not this can be, this part about demonstrated performance claims can be part of our regulations or not. But it'll be a start, and to see if I get pushback. If I get support from industry, the more support I get, the more likely that it can happen.
And I think the bottom line for industry is we want choices, right? We want to do right by our customers, right by our clients, but we want to have the choice, right? We don't want to be told you must use what's in that particular bottle from that guy or that gal, right? We want the choice.
Correct. And that's what I hope that it can be shown, or we get enough support that this can pass what our statute gives us. So, or somebody can maybe do a change in the statute. That's something I can't do. I'll vote for it.
So Alan, just to follow up, so to meet this criteria, are you envisioning the regulation to say something that they can provide you the data, the testing? You mentioned blueprinting and all that. Would that satisfy the requirement here? Is that what you?
Correct. What it'll be is provide data, and then in that data that you provide, there's a way that I can validate that in fact what's in the marketplace is your product. So one of the reasons that they eliminated the registration is back in the 80s, it was really a burden because of the technologies they had for the program to keep up with that registration. Now we have a little better means. Well, not really. We have the state IT system, so I shouldn't say that. Not you guys aside, but it should be a little easier maybe to get like an electronic form. I have a little bit of an issue with confidentiality, what companies want to divulge and not. I'll have to explore where that falls in. Do we get information? Can we keep it confidential? Can we assure the companies that their confidential information isn't going to be accessible through a Public Records Act request or anything like that?
Yeah, you're not going to be able to get the proprietary information at all. I don't think.
There are. I mean, the ARB does it all the time, and they have statutes and ways of protecting that information. They collect a lot of really nice information that I'm sure a lot of people would like. Okay. Well, everybody looks tired. They want to go home. Any other questions, or are we? Again, I thank everybody. This presentation will be there. Call me, send me an email if you have any questions or suggestions. One thing I will tell I don't have access to the web. I apologize. I should have put the address. But if you type in the web NIST Handbook 130. You will get a NIST site which will pull up the Handbook 130, which you can download as a PDF. There's no cost or charge to that. It's a U.S. government publication. And then if you look within that, they have sections. They have one section on automotive fluid requirements. I think it's section G of that handbook, which has a lot of verbiage about transmission fluids in it. But the NIST Handbook 130, just type that in on the web, and you can do 2020, so you get the most recent version, and it will pull that up. NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology or something like that. But it's a NIST handbook. The National Conference is an organization that develops that language, but currently the U.S. government under NIST manages it and publishes that. If you want the hardbound version, you pay $75 and they'll send it to you, but the PDF is available. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alan. Appreciate you doing this for our industry and our mutual stakeholders here. And we look forward to the next steps in the regulatory process. And we'll, if you have plans that change, certainly let us know, and we can make sure that we reach all of our interested parties and our licensees, registrants who are very much interested in where you go from here.
Okay, well, thank you. And I appreciate everybody's patience with me the last semester. I had some trying family issues, and I appreciate your understanding.
Oh, absolutely. Yep.
So off we go.
All right. Well, thank you very much for all who attended the Bar Advisory Group meeting earlier today and today's workshop this afternoon. We'll look forward to our next meeting in April, and hopefully we'll have another regulatory workshop of some kind if we're ready to do so, tying it into the Bar Advisory Group meeting that's on April 23rd. Thank you all who attended today.
Alan, if you need any help with World Pack,